Hello and welcome back to another session of Easier Marketing. Today we're going to be talking about the difference between being a marketing expert and being a CMO. There's kind of two different directions that one can go in a career. It's to go extremely technical, and that can pay off in huge ways. You can be, a linchpin in your company. You can be very powerful in your ability to drive results and all this kind of stuff. But you're very much the doer. You're the operator. You're the one in the accounts. You're making things happen. You have all the knowledge and domain expertise that you need to sort of make that happen. And then there's a CMO. There's somebody who's a bit more of a puppet master. It's the managerial route. It is somebody who looks across the board, across a whole business, and makes sure that they can make the actual business outcome come together, no matter what the channel is. So it's more channel agnostic. It's more high level. And it's an important distinction to make because, at least for Easier Agency, my agency that I run, we position ourselves as a growth partner. And that doesn't mean that we just look at things and say, okay, well, that's good, that's bad. It does mean that we're still specialists in quite a number of areas, but it also means that we look across the board. We want to make sure that the end result is the same end result that the actual founder is looking for, that the senior stakeholders are looking for, and we try and make sure that everything we're doing is aligned with that end goal. And that means that, okay, if we're running your ads, it doesn't mean we're always going to say, hey, just run more ads. We're not always going to position our service aligned with, okay, we're going to charge you a percentage of spend like other ads agencies might do. We might say, okay, well, we are doing this level of service. We want to align maybe with your result that makes sense for yourself. So that's what this is about. It doesn't necessarily say that, okay, your channel agencies, your channel freelancers, your channel experts are a bad thing by any stretch, but it is a more top-down perspective. So let's go through it now. So a lot of busy founders, especially if you're a small to medium-sized enterprise, are going to be the ones that are just trying to stretch across the board, across a lot of different marketing activities. And you kind of end up there as a result of your success. It's kind of a gilded cage. You get to a stage with your business where you are starting to hire folks, maybe you're in-housing, and you might have these different things going on, and then you are above it all trying to maintain the standards. You're the one saying, okay, well, is this result on Meta ads good enough? What are we doing on SEO? What are we doing on these other channels? Is our email up to scratch? You are using your best guesses about what things should look like, and you're vetting these partner agencies or these in-house marketers against your expectations. You're holding up these standards, right? So that's a really, really common thing to end up with. You're not usually going to have somebody that is just by trade a CMO or a broad skill set marketer in your business that can do everything. Usually you're the one who is across everybody that's doing the work, and you're trying to pull it all together and you're trying to make it all work. And this can be tricky. Like I find with my work as a fractional CMO, often I have to play kind of the therapist. So it's a pretty lonely job. It's tough being a founder. It's tough being a business owner because all the pressure's on you, all the responsibilities on you. If things aren't working, you're the one that has to make the cuts and break the bad news to folks. So it's really common that people get tired of this. People get worn out when there are challenges that they don't know how to overcome, and their experts aren't able to overcome it on their own basis. It falls to you to try and find a way forward, or to just keep poking and prodding folks. 46% is the finding that I found. People are saying when you're the founder, you are very lonely. You are more likely to exit the business if you're getting tired of this, getting burnt out on this. And it's difficult because there's nobody around to support necessarily. You've got your individual folks that aren't necessarily there to help the business. More so they're there to try and help their own business and to support your business as a byproduct of their service. So they're going to be focused on their service. You're also going to be spending a ton of time on the marketing, not actually running the marketing, just looking at everything that's going on. So approving copy, reviewing the creative, getting on calls, pulling the reports together, trying to make the numbers work. It's a lot of work just pulling everything together. And that time means money. If you are across a lot of different aspects, you can easily be spending 8 hours a week just communicating with these different agencies, even though they're the ones doing all of the work, if you're billing your time at, say, £200 an hour and you're doing it for 8 hours a week, that comes to 6,500 straight away. So this is a really, really difficult thing to try and balance and make the most of. And it's costly. So say, for example, you're looking today and you're a successful business owner and you have a number of agencies or specialists or freelancers in-house, whatever they may be, and you are at the top of it and you are the unpaid integrator. Alternatively, if you have a growth partner agency or a fractional CMO or somebody that you can delegate this responsibility to look after the marketing function as a whole, you have a conductor there who can stand over the top of this department where you can look at the meta ads, you can look at the SEO, you can look at the email, you can look at the TikTok, whatever it might be. And you have somebody that can bring it all together. And then as a CEO, not a CMO, you can look at, okay, what are the partnership opportunities? What is the product R&D that we can do? What is the logistics operational benefits that we can chase? What can we do in mergers and acquisitions? There are other things that are important to handle as a founder that are outside of the day-to-day demands of making sure the money keeps on flowing and trying to make sure that all of that works while also, dealing with finance and legal and operations and whatever else is going on in your business. That can be a real tricky thing to handle. So if you have a growth partner, and I say growth partner, this can be external. It could be an agency like mine, or it could be a fractional CMO. It could be a full-time CMO. It could just be a head of marketing. You might be a smaller business and you need somebody in there to wear many hats and do a lot of the doing as well. But you'll need somebody who can look over the top of it and make sure that all of the different numbers are feeding into the one number that counts. So these are two different folks that you could look at hiring. You've got your channel experts. So they usually are experts in one particular tactic. It could be meta ads. It could be SEO. If you feel like, this is what we need, go get that person, get that specialist, because they're going to be very, very meaningful for your business, specifically if it works. The challenge is if it doesn't work, you've then got somebody who you have to make the judgment on. Is it the channel? Is it the execution? Who's at fault when something isn't working, if a channel isn't functioning the way you need it to? Ideally, you have somebody who's an expert that can look across the board and say, okay, we're focused on revenue, we're focused on margin, we're focused on profitability, maybe even market share or something fluffier than that. Could be impact or building the lifestyle business that you want. Whatever your business goal is, you want somebody who can look at the top level and say, okay, well, I don't mind if the meta ads platform says that we're making a free X ROAS. The numbers at the end of the day haven't gone up. And so that's a problem. But an agency or an expert that's just looking at the meta ads won't be able to necessarily say that. So if you have somebody who's focusing on the in-platform metrics, the ROAS and so on, that's what they're reporting on. Ideally, somebody is there. Maybe it's you, maybe it's a growth partner or in-house CMO, whatever it might be, who's looking at the actual metrics that matter, the lifetime value, the contribution margin, the payback periods. Sometimes you'll have these folks that get paid based on a percentage of spend or, a fixed fee or something like this. But a lot of the time, you'll want to incentivize somebody ideally on the real outcome that you're looking for. So you might say, hey, if we can hit this level of profitability or we can hit this growth milestone, then everybody gets a bump or bonus or whatever it might be. Like ideally, you're aligning your benefits. Likewise, if you have a meta ads agency, and I'm using meta ads just because that's our specialization, but it could be anything, folks will say spend more on our channel. But nobody who's an expert is going to say, hey, pause us, take us out of the equation, put us out of a job. You need to redeploy the capital to a different channel. And maybe the seasonality changes and it's important to focus on different creative angles or product R&D or whatever it might be. So no channel expert is going to say, hey, our channel isn't really working, you should turn us off, because that doesn't align with their own business goals, but it does align with your business goals as a founder. So you need to have somebody, and that might be you, who can say, hey, this isn't working. It's important for us to reallocate. Likewise, a lot of the time, you're going to be the one that's briefing everyone. Ideally, you have somebody that can write those briefs, who can keep the agencies all coordinated, somebody who's selling per channel deliverables, somebody who's selling their hours. That's all well and good. But in an ideal world, you have an operating cadence that is business wide. How do we marry up our marketing with our logistics team? How do we know that we've got a certain run rate and we're going to need to reorder stock, and we're going to be forecasting that we sell this amount of stock in a certain period, and therefore we need to order ahead of time because we're going to run into a situation in 2 months' time where our stock hasn't arrived because maybe there's a long lead time or something like that. Ideally, you have, again, that top-down operating perspective. In your week, you might be attending their calls and approving their work and looking at what they've done in the last week, this kind of thing. But ideally, again, you have somebody that can look across all of the activities and bring it together for a summary so that you're not the one controlling every aspect of your marketing function. Ideally, you can just join the calls as an observer, or you can get a summary after the fact and you can say, great, this is handled. I can focus on the thing that I want to focus on. You might have an expert that goes deep on one channel only. But ideally, again, you might want to look at how do we make sure that our positioning, our brand, our operation as a whole stays consistent, and you have somebody to hold people to account and uphold standards. And it might even be a case of pacing. Speed and quality go together. First to market is just as good as best in market. So making sure that you have the high standards upheld all the time is really important, and that's going to fall to a founder. This is another aspect that we're going to cover in the next slide. Retention can be a really important thing. And if you are somebody who focuses on acquisition and you know that there's a retention problem, how are you going to solve that? You might focus on retargeting instead of, all right, it might be a product problem. It might be a email problem. It might be a customer voice problem. We might need to understand a little bit about the culture of why folks like this or don't like it, why they don't stick around. That goes beyond just, okay, well, maybe we'll run more retargeting ads. We need to test some trust and credibility type ads or something like this. And likewise, you're not going to have somebody who is going to tell you, no. Somebody is not going to say, hey, pause us. Our stuff isn't working. But it could be that marketing as a whole isn't the problem. There could be some totally different problem. It might be customer service. It could be anything. So ideally, you have somebody that can help you look at your marketing function as a whole and be able to say how the marketing connects with everything else, not a singular tactic. So this is what we're talking about, right? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. This is what I've been commenting on in that last slide. If you are a meta ads agency or an SEO agency or an email marketing agency, you're going to tackle any problem from your own perspective. So say you are an email marketing agency and you're getting signups, but they're not converting. And you might think, okay, great. Well, we need more flows. We need more sequences. We need abandonment triggers. We need segmentation. We need personalization. And you need to pay us more because you need this. That's the problem that you're going to run into if you're a founder and you don't have an expert who can say, well, let's look holistically. Where's the problem at? Really, it could be product onboarding. It could be the pricing. It could be how your offer connects with your customer in a fundamental way. Looking at the economics of an individual agency or service partner or even an in-house team member, they're going to be incentivized to serve themselves. They want to have a job. They want to stick around. They want to be valuable. But is that the real solution? Ideally, you're not the only one trying to come up with that real solution. And so costs to acquire a customer are always going to be going up. CPMs are always going to be going up. ROI is always going to be going down. And so if you have somebody who specializes in a specific platform, they're going to be working harder. They're going to be getting better. And that's the only way they're going to fight against this cost to acquire a customer increase that's happening every year, because competition goes up, platforms saturate, things change. And The only control you have against channels getting harder is you getting better, but getting better is not the same as doing things differently. Ideally, you have somebody who can look across the board and say, again, how are we going to test and trial new things that are going to get that increase in incrementality that's going to make a meaningful difference? If you've been running meta ads for 10 years, how are you going to survive as a business if your meta ads only goes down every year? You're going to need to look further afield. You're going to need to be creative, go back to the drawing board, think about how your product can better relate, how you can do different things better. Do you see what I mean? Any channel expert is going to see the problems through the lens of their expertise, but doing things better is not the same as doing things differently and trying new things. So this is from a great book called Traction, and it's called the Bullseye Framework. So if you think about how we get the message out there, you might go off the basis of, oh, I've heard this approach is great, or we've had some luck with this other approach in a different business, or whatever it might be. And there's a lot of different aspects that you might want to try, but how do you pick? And this is kind of a solution to that. So there's about 19 channels that this book calls out. And you basically want to start with this outer ring. And all of these different channels can belong in the outer ring. And you'll want to say, okay, great. A lot of businesses, realistically, they get most of their benefit. I think the statistic is something around 70% for a lot of businesses get their revenue from one particular channel. And that ends up your center ring here, your bullseye. So this is where you concentrate. And if you can, you want to try and supersede that. So my example in the last slide, say you're a business that's been running meta ads for the last 10 years, you live and die on this channel and you really need something different because it's getting harder every year. This might be your focus. Maybe it's meta ads. But in this secondary ring, you always want to have a few channels. 3 to 5 channels. You want to be running experiments. You want to keep it lean and statistically significant. And that means you want to look at, okay, how much can we spend? It might be a case where you stop making money after £100 per customer or something like that. If you try a new channel and it costs £120 to get a new customer on that channel, then you'll want to keep it going for a little while and see if you can improve that and see if you can get there. That's great. That's statistically significant. You want to look at that scientifically. If you try a new channel and it costs £1,000 to get a new customer, pretty quickly you're going to say earlier than the £120 one, we should probably call this because, all right, we spent £500, we've not got anything out of it. We'll call it early and we can come back around to it. But picking some particular channels to always have a middle ring, that's the game plan. That's what a CMO should be doing. And that is marketing strategy. So having that breadth of awareness of these different channels and knowing enough to be dangerous and having a network where you can pull in experts to say, all right, this is the person for you. This business needs to be trialing TikTok Shop, social selling, affiliate marketing, PR, whatever it might be. You need some wacky stuff, maybe blogs or SEO. It could be offline or trade shows, whatever it might be. Depending on the different business model, you might lean into some common approaches first. So if you're B2B, you might be looking at outreach, offline events, speaking engagements, sales approaches, content, this kind of stuff. That can be a good first approach. But if you are B2C, looking at social ads, search ads, something where you know that there's already a common demand, and if you put it in front of folks, then folks are going to be attracted to it, that could be your first picks. And it's okay to go with sort of default choices, but the most important aspect is you're always testing. Because otherwise you end up being that business where, hey, we've had this same channel that has worked for 10 years and it's getting worse every year and our business is going down and down and down and it's not great. So having an active approach to always trying new things and improving the things that are showing signs, constantly trying to supersede that winning central focus channel, that's really, really important. And it's also important to think about, these are different channels and they can have their own incrementality. They drive their own individual benefits, but they also synergize. And so you might find that, all right, if we have a big push on social ads, that actually our Amazon goes way up. Our costs go down for acquiring a customer in different channels when we do certain things. You might find that, all right, if we try TV, that suddenly our meta ads doubled overnight. And not looking at those individual channel stats, but looking at that holistic number that you're trying to control, profitability or whatever it is, that's where it's coming together. So again, as a founder, this is a complex thing to try and coordinate and to be testing and keeping an eye on the benefits and losses of different approaches. That's a lot to look after. And this again is where having an expert that can look top down at the whole marketing function is a big benefit. There's a lot of channels that you can be testing there. And another consideration you want to make is, what is your time to purchase? You might have some businesses out there that have 0-day purchases. That correlation between increasing spend in a channel and the revenue going up is like 1-to-1. People see it, they buy it, impulse buy, that's it. That can be a pretty straightforward business to grow. But there will be a lot of businesses out there that see something and they decide to buy, but they still don't buy immediately. And this could be doubly true for anything that's a more considered purchase or a B2B business where you might know about a brand for years before you ever actually become a customer. And so thinking about what the first impression looks like, where you're reaching people, how you're reaching people, what kind of thing you're saying is a really, really important thing to consider. How do you build your brand so that folks are going to remember you when they're ready to buy? How do you build a reputation that makes people feel, well, of course I'd buy this. I trust this. Why wouldn't I? Thinking about the mix between brand building and actual activation, sales activation of those customers that you're warming up, that can be a thing to think about as well. And there are certain channels that will be good at one part and not the other. So say, for example, one that's emerging a lot right now is TikTok Shop and social selling, social commerce, where you're doing live streams and you're showing people certain things and it's this kind of stuff. It's very, 1-to-1 and building, a bank of influencers and this kind of stuff where you're building a lot of trust. Doesn't always have a very quick ROI, but it really assists with maximizing the actual benefit of your sales activation channels. So say, for example, you're running TV and you are getting a lot of folks interested and aware of your brand. They're building some degree of they're building a degree of trust. And then when you come along and say, hey, we're running a big sale, and somebody says, oh, well, I already like them. I already kind of were thinking about it. And you're pushing them over the fence. It's very easy to just go purchase. But thinking about how you can help people, how you can build yourself up as a trusted advisor in the space, that's a really important thing to consider. So thinking about how you land in the market, how you land with your voice, you want to effectively make sure that marries up. So there's very clear evidence to show that if you are investing in being there in your category, even if you are up against very similar size brands and you've got very similar products, if you can build a bigger, more trusted brand in people's minds, when you actually push the market on, all right, time to buy, you are going to be more trusted. You're going to have 90% higher revenue ROI lift if you have that nice balance of brand plus performance. And if you go back to performance only, we've seen a 40% drop. And this is some analysis that's been going on for quite a while because, hey, there's a lot of money that goes into this stuff. It would make sense to folks if you could just, hey, say, buy our stuff. But if you were already the obvious choice and then you say, buy our stuff, then it's going to really click a lot better. So what this means is you want to effectively think about selling a little bit like dating. You don't go on a date and try and go for the home run straight away. You don't kiss on the first date or whatever it is. Like, you want to think about, okay, how do I show up and be trustworthy? How do I show up and look great? You don't try and just go for straight away, say, hey, are you ready to like take this to the next step? Let's get married or whatever. Like, this is about a considered approach to buyer psychology, to think in their shoes. So say, for example, you are writing outreach emails. If you go out there and say, hey, we do SEO, do you want to book a call? You're not going to have a lot of responses to this kind of stuff. But if you show up and say, hey, we're an SEO company, we have been monitoring folks that are having trouble, and we just saw that you had a huge drop off in this particular area. Here's a big report and the fixes to handle it. I hope it's useful. And then you just step away and you say, we've helped somebody here. We've hopefully built up a level of trust with folks and said, this is a way that we help. Here's something valuable. You can hopefully then be seen as a trustworthy partner and advisor in the future, because you've already helped. You've led with value, permissionless value. You've gone out and just said, hey, here's something for you. We're thinking in your shoes. We're thinking about what matters to you. And you've put something out there that is meaningful for them. And so this is really, really useful to think about when it comes to how you're organizing your channel strategies. You want to think about how things feed together. If you have that outreach happen and say, all right, somebody opens up the report and they look at it and it's great, and then you run some retargeting ads, and then here's some extra value, and you can bring them into a demo of some kind. Say, hey, we've got this software that helps you spot anytime you have a problem. And maybe they're interested in that. And they say, well, we already had this good experience because we saw the same software in action already. It called out for us when we had a problem and it already helped us. So why wouldn't we? The benefit is obvious, and you're already being considered now as a trusted advisor in that person's psychology. And so they might join on the call, and you might get on there and you really hit it off, and you engage in a great sales process. And here again, we've got outreach to ads to sales. That's how it can fit together. And so having a top-down perspective on how these things work together, going stepwise, it's not marrying on the first date. It is showing up as useful, valuable, great advisor to somebody in their core interests. And piece by piece, you're building these channels together to make sure that you are actually helping folks. And it's only at the end that you say, hey, we have this big thing happening. We're inviting you to it. We're not going to push you into it, but it makes sense for you. And they're already thinking, it makes sense for us. And they're saying yes. That's how you get to a yes. So we've touched a little bit on positioning. And like I mentioned before, if you are a business and you've got other businesses in your space, I'm an agency, for example. I work on software and things like that as well. But there are a lot of agencies out there, and folks do what I do. I am not a special unicorn of any kind. I know what I know, and I promise that I can help folks with it, and I do the best that I possibly can. And there are other folks that can do as good or better a job than I can, for sure. I mean, there always will be. There's also more affordable folks. If I'm a good fit, but somebody wants to only spend, £200 on a big service that I offer for £2,000, you'll find it for sure. Will it be better? I don't know. Maybe you'll get lucky. The odds, we'll see how it ends up for you if you try and make it work. But landing your positioning carefully is very, very important. Before you start committing to an approach, understanding the customer and their psychology is so important. So think about their alternatives. What do they do right now without you? They probably do something, or maybe nothing, and they don't mind that. Or they just have some hodgepodge solution, or they DIY it, whatever it might be. It could be a totally different solution than your solution, but it works for their purpose and it solves their problem in some other way. So thinking about what those alternatives are and understanding what makes you unique is really valuable. So this isn't just about, okay, well, we have this service and we have this feature. No, you think about what are the benefits? What are the outcomes? for the customer. So thinking in those terms holistically, not just, hey, we can try a new blog because we write blogs. Looking from a business first perspective at a customer and looking at the customer perspective of our business, that two-sided thing, making sure there's somebody who fully understands that stuff is really important for your business. Because otherwise, hey, maybe you are a fashion brand and you sell your lovely clothes, and that's great, and people click with it, and that's all well and good, but they could go somewhere else and buy some similar clothes, and that wouldn't be much good. You wouldn't be able to charge much. It'd be a bit of a race to the bottom because somebody's just going to say, well, I can get that on, Temu or, Primark or Amazon or whatever it might be, some bigger shop that can just afford to do it more cheaply. And it's effectively the same in the customer's eyes. So, okay, how can we line up our positioning so it's different? Maybe we say, hey, we're not just a fashion brand, we are environmentally friendly fashion brand, or we are a fashion brand that focuses on Greek beachwear, focusing on something where people say, hey, this is what we really want. This is what we really care about. Here's a way that we can differentiate. That can be really valuable. And thinking about that value, how do people feel about you? How do people feel about what they want from the world and what they're thinking? This is really important. And translating what you do and the benefits that you have into their ideal outcome that they're looking for is important. And then how do you position yourself and how do you communicate that to make it obvious that you are the obvious choice? This is the best fit for the customer. The customer cares about some specific stuff. It might be price, but it might also be some particular aspect of the product they're looking for, or a particular problem that they have, or a way the problem shows up. It could be that they are not a very trusting person. They've been burnt before. And so regarding that aspect of their thinking where, hey, if you've been burned before by X, Y, and Z, this is what you need to know. And again, you can start to rebuild trust in that space and have that customer that would reject anybody else, but you've directly said, we know that you get burned on this stuff. We are the folks that come in and help folks that have been burned on that trust aspect. And so you can put yourself into a category. You also want to always think about, okay, we don't just want to be in a category. We want to be in a category that people genuinely buy. So if you go out there and you say, okay, I'm going to be a coach, I'm going to help people, realize their legacy and understand their impact for generations to come, or something like that. Like, yeah, it kind of works. That's something that you could do, or you could go out and say, hey, I am a coach that helps you get a very specific outcome. We help people that have this particular problem and we help them get this particular outcome. And this is how we do it. And the service could then be the same, but the positioning is a little different. Do you see what I mean? So here's a couple examples here. So if you have a bigger competitor, you don't just want to be cheaper. You could change the question that gets asked. So Avis versus Hertz. They both do car rentals. And Hertz is huge, but Avis is the challenger brand. And they went out to market and they said, we know Hertz is bigger than us. You could choose Hertz. They're great, but we're better. We're smaller and we're better. You see what I mean? You could say, all right, we're Tylenol, and they didn't claim to be a better aspirin. They focused on one particular aspect. They said, hey, aspirin can have a risk, and we don't have that risk. Or say you are Help Scout. This is a B2B SaaS that helps with customer service. We're not just a cheaper Zendesk. They've had that positioning before, and they tried to compare on features, they compared on the specific stats, ticket deflection, but they just lost every time because they're smaller. It's hard to compete with a big brand that's accomplished so much, and they changed their positioning. They thought about, okay, how can we do things differently and say, all right, we're not just this again, but smaller and worse. They're not trying to say, hey, we're cheaper because we're worse. They reframed the thought process. They landed on a different sort of mental category, a different shelf that folks are putting them on. And they said, we are DTC growth tooling. We are reorienting ourselves from not just a customer service necessity. We're actually focused on getting you growth. Again, they're thinking about their customers. If it's DTC folks and they wanted growth, we help you with DTC growth. Even if the features are similar, even if the product is similar, changing the way they're perceived and depositioning the alternative is really useful because you can say, hey, Zendesk is great. They've got all these tools. Some of them are better than ours, but we do some things that they don't, and we help in ways that they don't. And we get you the outcome you're really looking for. And that way they become a more obvious choice and they become right for a lot of people. So with this brand work in mind, where you're thinking about lots of different channels and activities, we also want to make sure that everything we're doing has an incremental benefit. And that incrementality basically refers to incremental revenue that wouldn't have happened without it being active. So you might have brand search on Google picking up a lot of apparent ROI, but would that revenue have happened if you weren't investing on Google Ads on those brand terms for your own brand name? So if somebody's already searching for you, does that mean they're just going to buy? Do you need to show up at the top of the page, or would you do just fine? That's a good question. So trying to understand incrementality is a really important thing that you may or may not be doing if you don't have somebody who's being that top-down perspective looking at everything that's going on in your marketing. So if you look at the platform ROAS, say you are running Google Ads, the Google Ads might say that we are so successful, we're so high ROI, we're doing great, and we've generated 50 conversions for you. And then you look in your Shopify, if you're an e-commerce store, and indeed you can see 50 conversions for the same time period. That's great. And then if you look at your meta ads, and it also says, oh, we did 50 conversions as well, but you don't have 100 conversions. So if you were to believe those individual platforms about their return on ad spend and the ROI across these different activities, it would probably add up to a lot higher than what actually exists. And so you need a bit of a single source of truth. And this is kind of your daily operational dashboards. If you have a business-to-business type of business where you are selling enterprise software or a large service or something like this, high-ticket service, you might use Salesforce or you might use HubSpot. And those platforms are very good at keeping track of the instances where somebody has interacted with one of your channels and has landed on your website. So you'd use URL tags, UTMs. These are basically little snippets of information that go on the end of your links, and you want to try and keep a lot of consistency. And every time you're linking to your website, you want to have these URL tags that helps your platform understand where the traffic has come from. So if you have folks coming from Google Ads, maybe they didn't come from Google Ads as their very first touch point. It could be that they first heard about you on Meta Ads, and then they learned about you through Googling and they clicked on a Google Ads results. But then maybe they, signed up for an email and they carried on. They had an email interaction and it was an invite to a sales call, and then the sales team will claim ownership of that conversion. But really, every step along the way had a touch on the ball. They all had their value. And you might have not seen that conversion happen if you didn't have one or more of these activities going on. But which of the activities is most valuable? How do you sort of delineate the real value of this stuff? So on Meta, for example, on Meta ads, it might say, well, we track our conversions based on 7 days since somebody clicked or 1 day since somebody viewed. You might even have models conversions. So since you had iOS 14 and there was a lot of breaking in the tracking based on the clicks, a lot of channels will now just model the conversions, literally make things up to say, okay, on average, this is probably about right because we have to model and give you an expectation that we don't actually have all the data. So sometimes maybe 20, 40% of the conversions that are in there are literal guesses. And you might even have some of the bottom of funnel campaigns, like I mentioned, this branded search, the retargeting, this kind of stuff can appear really high ROI, but is it incremental? Did it actually generate the revenue on its own, or do you need to try and portion out the value? So how do you layer in and triangulate a better source of truth? For a smaller business, I promise you, chasing this, you're never going to get a perfect answer. If you're a bigger business, there are some more things to do that you can get a little bit more information out of, but even so, you're never going to get a perfect vision of exactly the number in terms of the ROI for a particular activity. But because you are dealing with larger scale of spend, larger numbers of visitors, larger number of conversions, you can get more statistical significance if you're running things like geo-lift tests. So you might only do this maybe once a quarter. You might turn a channel off for certain regions. Maybe 25% of your regions, you would say, okay, we're going to spend 3 weeks not advertising in this couple of areas, and then we're going to see what happens to the revenue. And we'll hopefully show some causality that way. We're going to say, all right, if we stop spending in this area over this period of time, what happens to the revenue in that particular area? And then you can try and get a little bit of a correlation and understand, okay, how does this stuff line up? Doubly so, if you are a really big budget, then you can look at marketing mix modeling. And this is not just a case of, you're looking at specific tests in specific areas. This looks across a huge number of parameters and even non-marketing related parameters like the weather and things like this, because lots of products are seasonal and you might have different behaviors based on different environmental factors. So say, for example, you get all of these data sets all cleaned up and you're looking at the rainfall, you're looking at your Google spend, your visitor, maybe the store foot traffic if you're brick and mortar stores as well, and you pull this all together into one place and you do a very complicated technical mathematical process and you get this analysis together, a statistical model that can then show, okay, based on all these parameters across all this time and all this data, it can be a statistical significant evidence that helps you, again, triangulate the real value of these different activities. So this attribution decay piece, you might want to consider, okay, is it the first click that matters more? Is it the last click that matters more? Do you want to have different ways of attributing value based on the different behaviors of the channels? So if you invest a huge amount on TV ads, for example, and you have loads of interest and loads of people, and you have a way to keep track of folks that have seen the activity in the certain regions where you're running those ads, and then you hit the retargeting really hard, you might see a huge ROI. And then if it's a meta ads agency, they might say, hey, look at this incredible result that we generated off the back of our retargeting. But really, you want to look at the value that's been generated overall. So this last mile, this last touch point can't take all the credit. When you're looking at how valuable these different activities are, you would want to look at them together and get an idea of, okay, where is the value? Are the people that saw us on TV going to purchase regardless, even if we didn't have this performance activity that helps us activate these latent buyers, these interested folks that we've given that great first touch point to on TV? Or maybe it's a really important step. You might have a lot of awareness built up, but people won't have actually converted unless they then saw your brand again in an environment where they could just buy right away, because you might not be able to do that on TV. So this is why I say on the last couple of slides, if you have a mix of brand and performance, if you have a mix of activities in your bullseye behavior, you might see that some of these activities work really, really well as your brand awareness piece. And then to actually close the sale, you might have other activities that are just as important, but you want to get an idea and look at everything together, look at how it synergizes, and hopefully understand. The reality is, again, you will never have a perfect number you can put to this stuff. The truth of how this stuff works is so messy. It's too messy, and it's across every single buyer you've ever had. You might have somebody who buys from you and you say, oh yeah, it's from the retargeting activity. They saw something and then they bought because we used a retargeting. But the truth might be they heard about you from their friend, and then they saw the product in action somewhere else, and then they saw you on TV, and then they bought. And the retargeting didn't even have anything to do with it. The retargeting just so happened to show up on the same day. And maybe they didn't even interact with it. But because a platform like Meta Ads will attribute the conversion if they just viewed an ad, it might not have had any effect at all. So this incrementality piece is important to understand and consider. So an example of this, you might want to do this kind of stuff with the GeoLift test, the marketing mix modeling. But honestly, this kind of behavior is really reserved for folks that are spending 4, 5, 6 figures per month to get that statistical significance. More so if you're a smaller brand, a startup with a limited budget, you'd focus on the attribution. And there are still things that you can look at. So as an example, I worked with a brand this year that was getting a lot of results on their Amazon. And we actually found that a lot of the performance was driven from Meta Ads, which didn't even link to Amazon. So when we looked at the Meta ad spend and we looked at the Amazon revenue, and we put those two columns next to each other on a Google Sheet, and we did a simple correlation formula, it will show things like, okay, is it a 1 or is it a -1 or is it a 0? So a 0 would be no correlation, a -1 would be inverse correlation, and a 1 would be a strong correlation, very strong. And we were seeing a 0.8, which is like an 80% likelihood of, very strong correlation that the Meta ad spend on the same day was driving a higher Amazon revenue. And what we could do to measure the delay on how long it was taking people to consider actually buying to kind of prove the point was we could offset things by 1 day. So we could say, all right, if we say the same results on Meta ad spend and we do it 1 day later on the Amazon revenue, we saw the number of the correlation go from a 0.8 to a 0.7. And 1 more day went to a 0.6 and a 0.5. And this was because the product was an impulse buy. It was like under £20. It was an easy purchase, easy no-brainer. And so people were seeing it. They loved it. Without us being able to track it, they Googled and found it on Amazon, and they happened to rather buy it on Amazon. Maybe there was a more trusted shipping approach or something like that. And they just wanted to get it on Amazon. And we were actually seeing more results coming from Amazon than from the Shopify. And so without this broader perspective and this analysis of the numbers, we wouldn't have been able to determine that. We would have just been left in the dark and thinking, well, Amazon's doing great. I don't know why. Shopify is not doing so great, even though we're spending on all this Meta ads behavior, targeting the Shopify. But the customers were experiencing it in their own way, where they were seeing the ad, they loved the product, they wanted to find it on Amazon, which they trusted, and they knew that they could get it affordably and with the same day shipping, next day shipping, and they just went to Amazon. And we couldn't track that. Another consideration about the different activities you're running and the different channels you're involved in is, again, thinking about that customer and where they're at. How aware are they of your product, of the solution in general that your product belongs to, of the problem that your solution solves? Are they completely unaware of all of this? Have they never thought about it? Maybe they just live every day and they have like stomach pains, and that's because they eat sweets all day, but they never even thought about it. And you have a product that helps people get off sweets and help diet and things like this. How aware are folks? You want to have an idea of which value propositions are going to make sense and connect with people where they are at their part of their journey. So this is particularly important with paid activity and can be tested with more organic activity. You might do a lot of social posts and see that some topics really rise to the top, and that can help you then say, okay, great, we should probably test this in paid, boost these winning posts and things like this. And doubly so, it's important because platforms like Meta ads have moved away from allowing very fine-tuned targeting. More and more, you will find that the creative is the targeting. And that becomes an important piece when you understand how these algorithms work, because they're all pattern matching algorithms. They want to give the right message, the right ad, the right creative media to the right person at the right time where they are in their journey. Are they ready and interested in seeing something that you're sharing? So this is important to consider. You want to make sure that you have validated what you're saying in different places. And you can probably do that by just understanding more about your customers. If you don't have somebody that's talking to customers, and in particular talking to different customers at different stages in their journey before they even know about your problem or their solution or the product itself, what do they say? What do they care about? Because if you can say things in their language, at the point where they're at, then it's going to resonate a lot more, and it matters less how you say it if you're saying the right thing. So say, for example, you create an amazing, super polished advert and a TV ad or something that's creative and amazing and wonderful and really high production. But if it's confusing, if it doesn't relate to the meaningful difference in their lives, then they're just not going to care. It's not going to have an effect. And if you have something that is very lo-fi, very authentic, but it really nails the topic in an intelligent way, that can have a way better impact and make sense for them for the place where they are. And even so, say, for example, somebody's nearly sold. You might want to build a little trust, a little credibility. There might be something missing, some objection. And so you want to have awareness up front, showing off in an emotional way, probably how great this thing is, and then getting into the logistics. And when somebody's thinking about it a little more, logically, is this going to be a valid use of your money? And yeah, we should probably buy it because we're seeing other people that have gotten the result from it, this kind of thing. That can come from the experimental stuff where you're putting in the actual creative and the spend and getting it in front of people. But you can also survey folks. You can also have these interviews, have these conversations with the customers, do your social listening, and mine for your voice of customer. So, say, for example, you use a AI like Grok. Grok can be great because it has an attachment to all of Twitter, all of X, because it's built on this stuff. And so you might use a platform like that to say, hey, what are people talking about right now in my space? What do they care about? What's the current hot topics? You can understand a lot from this. And it's really important to understand where the customer's at, what they care about. So say, for example, you have somebody in your business who is the conductor. And this could be a growth partner agency. This could be a fractional CMO. This could be a head of marketing, a CMO internal, full time, or you could have a co-founder who is an expert marketer, or it's you. Regardless, you want to have a bit of a cadence. So ideally, you can see when you do have channel experts, you have a consistency to it. You're not just, fighting fires, running around, headless chicken. Ideally, somebody is orchestrating the marketing department. You want to have a view that sits above the channels, looks at it modularly, and is able to say decisively, okay, based on this stuff, we're making course corrections. We've looked at the analysis of the incrementality. We've looked at the performance of the different creators that worked over here. And so we want to put this somewhere else as well. You might have a social post that does really well. And so you want to bring that into your email campaigns. Or you might have a new seasonal event coming up. And so you want to start the production of new ads for it. Or you've got a analysis of the social listening space and people are all buzzing about this new AI tool or whatever. And so we want to make a content piece about it. So having a bit of a cadence. Let's say you've got a weekly cadence along the top here. You might spend your Mondays looking at your dashboards, looking at your forecasts, looking at what the different channel experts are actually doing and shipping, and having your weekly calls, making sure everybody's briefed and getting a good understanding of where things are at and hearing from them, ingesting, what's important right now, trying to ask the hard questions. Are things working? Based on what we did last time, are we getting a good idea? You might want to have cross-agency calls as well. So you might want to bring experts together. So maybe this is on your Tuesday. You might have somebody that is bringing it all together to say, hey, we've had this look at things on Monday. We've had some conversations. We want to think about this stuff. And so let's put it to the experts. What is their recommendations? Having a CMO, having a head of marketing, somebody who has this kind of T-shaped skill set, which we'll get onto in a minute. Very, very useful, but you don't want to invalidate the hardworking experts that you have on your team. You want to be able to set your team up for success and also have them pitch in on that holistic success and help each other, share insights together. So having cross-agency calls, having cross-department calls where, your designer gets to talk to your developer and your developer gets to talk to your ads people, and your ads people get to talk to your email people, and it all comes together in a nice way. So hopefully by Wednesday, everybody can get a really clear brief. We've all got clear goals that is top-down perspective, and we all understand the narrative that we have accumulated over the last couple of days of analysis. And you can say, okay, great, let's all execute this narrative. Let's all go after this goal. And together, it's not a game of, who's actually driving the most important stuff. It's about working together and making sure that it's all going in the right direction and steering. Then say on Thursday, you might say, okay, great. Let's focus just on strategy. Maybe there are other things that can be done. There's looks at the product outside of the marketing itself. We can think about what we can do with the positioning. We can look at customer interviews. We can do the revisions that are required to get a clear view over the coming week and say, okay, great. While the channel experts are working on stuff, we can sign off on things. We can get a clear idea of the strategy pieces that aren't going to come up all the time. And then on the Friday, we can say, okay, great. Here's what we've done this week. And a piece of information can be given to the founder. So along the way with these conversations that you might be tactically doing, and a founder might previously be that integrator who's in all these calls and dozens of hours and all this stuff, trying to bring it all together and running around. Ideally, a founder can just show up to one or more of the calls, maybe just this cross-agency call. After we've all had your individual conversations, you might want to say, okay, great. The founder can be an observer. They want to obviously also give their input because they're also going to have a really great amount of context to bring to the table. They might be able to say, hey, we need to turn off this channel soon or turn down the spend because our logistics system is having an issue, or we need to, change the focus because a new product feature is coming out, or whatever it might be. So founders absolutely have their own perspective that's really important to have. But when they're not in it and trying to work in it so much, they can work on it more. And so also having this cadence in there so that they're getting the reporting that they need at the end of the week, and they can go away, have their weekend, feel refreshed, come back fresh every time. Rest is really important and something that is undersubscribed to in the Western world. You'll see in other parts of the world, people take rest seriously. Take China, for example. Folks don't work much harder than the Chinese, but in China, everything shuts down at lunchtime. If you've ever worked with somebody from China, you'll be surprised because they'll put their head down after lunch and literally fall asleep at their desk. That is the standard behavior in China. Rest is really important, and you want to come back fresh. You want to come back with the knowledge that, okay, we have the clarity, we have the energy, we can do this. Likewise, you might want to think about, not necessarily on a weekly cadence, maybe this is yearly, quarterly, monthly. We want to think about different cadence pieces that are strategic and doesn't necessarily fall to anyone unless you have a integrator that isn't the founder, somebody who's a specialist, somebody that can look at this stuff. Maybe quarterly, you might look at the forecasting. You might want to build out your revenue model and get a bull perspective, a base perspective, a bear perspective, match that against the stock runway, look at the merchandising calendar. Otherwise, you get to Black Friday and you're a week out and you're like, oh God, what are we going to do? Let's do a sale. I don't know. Counter to that, you would hopefully start in July, months ahead of time. You'd say, okay, great. We're looking months ahead. We're already buying the stock. We know it's going to take a month or two to get in. We're going to be planned for this. We're already starting the production of the creative and thinking about what the promotions are going to be. We're looking at what other people have done. We're looking at the competitors. This kind of consideration is important to have that other strategic head in the game that can say, all right, great. We are prepared for this stuff. Similarly, managing the agents, looking at not just what they say, but what they're doing, looking at the reporting, digging into the details, looking at how do we make sure that, okay, is paid interrupting the SEO? Is the email taking too much credit for what's going on? And actually the retargeting is doing more, or maybe something else. Is there somebody who's not getting things done? Do we need to do a little bit of management here and shorten the leash a little bit to hold people accountable for what's going on? And then you don't have the founder who probably should be focused on building the next great product feature or something like that, or dealing with partnerships or whatever it might be. Ideally, you have somebody who's looking after this stuff. Likewise, you want to be able to say, okay, if there is a particular issue, how can we dissect it, understand it? How can we understand what the biggest next bottleneck is? That's a really, really important leadership piece, is to always be looking at what is the biggest bottleneck for us right now. And if the founder is not necessarily a marketing expert, maybe you're a dentist and you're a great dentist, but that doesn't make you a great business owner if you can't scale your dentist practice because you're not a marketing expert and you have a couple agencies helping you out. How are you going to handle this if you don't have the right kind of retention happening? If people come in for one dentist appointment and then they never come back, how can we crack this without just relying on a channel expert to say, oh, do more of what we do. Just pay us more and we'll solve it. But really, maybe it's something totally different. It's a different channel. It's a different activity. Maybe it's not even a marketing problem at all. And so thinking about this top-down view, ideally not swamping the founder with these details, that's a really important thing that can be owned strategically by a marketing expert that isn't a singular channel expert. It's very important to consider having this sort of head of marketing role in there. So if you're a channel expert and you're watching this, the question is, how do you become this sort of head of marketing role, this CMO, fractional CMO, focusing on more than just what you look after? The answer to that is just keep doing what you're doing. Keep growing, keep building that depth of your expertise, because it is really, really important. And then you can add breadth. So the T-shaped skill set, you've probably heard of it. This was popularized in 2013 by Rand Fishkin, but it's actually going back to the 80s with big agencies at McKinsey. People coined this quite a while ago, and it exists in more than just marketing, of course. So thinking about the breadth, if I'm a expert in meta ads, for example, that means that I really, really know the algorithm, the creative, the bidding, all this kind of stuff. But I also know copywriting, biopsychology. I know media production. I know how to source influencers. I know what the sort of social landscape, the social media landscape is like. I know management. I know how to do market research. I know how to manage the data after the fact and the forecasting. I know how to talk to leaders and understand how to communicate with folks that have way too little time and they don't need the technical depth. They just need the simple, clear information that can be put together into a digestible package. So having all these different skills come together into one place makes you dangerous. And as you get to a stage where you're not just handling a singular channel, you're actually moving into managing channels that you're not an expert at, you still want to know enough to be dangerous so that you can say, this is underperforming, or this is doing great. Or okay, if we're hiring an SEO agency, then we're expecting results in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Or if you are working with a e-commerce brand that you know how to handle logistics situations and build a runway. So there's all these different aspects that you want to bring into the fact before you can say, yeah, we can handle anything and we can, be in charge of a lot of different aspects and not just be taken by an agency that's going to say, yeah, we've got it, trust us, you'll be sipping pina coladas on the beach by next week. We'll just handle it. And if you trust them and you think they're great, then I hope they are. But they could also just be saying, oh, yeah, the results look really great. Our expert person is on it and you're seeing great numbers and they're sending great numbers, but these are the channel numbers. And maybe in your own bank account, you're not seeing that same great result. So it's really important to have that depth because that gets you the respect in the room. And if you're a generalist, you can be talked over by these specialists. So it's important to have depth and expertise and be respected as somebody that can make a difference with what you do. But also, you don't want to have a ceiling over your head because being technical is great. But when your channel stops being viable, then you're out of a job and you will be wanting to have a bit more breadth to say, okay, we can help with more than just this one thing. Maybe, for example, if you're a Google Ads expert, you want to add SEO expertise to it and say, we can do these two things together because we know that they're going to feed into each other in a meaningful way. So how do you accumulate this knowledge? Let's say, okay, step by step, just getting an idea for the canon of what you do. So this is the fundamental learnings of what folks always understand when they are an expert about your channel. Say, for example, if it's email marketing, you know all about deliverability, you know about sequences, you know about segmentation, you know about building curiosity, you know about the triggers and the technical setup and the tracking. Then maybe you learn some of the related factors. So maybe you learn the unit economics of a brand so that you can say not just a case of, oh, when you invest in us, you get this ROI based on a ROAS figure, return on ad spend, that's just tied to the full revenue. Maybe you want to be able to say, no, this is real profit. If we've understood your unit economics, we can break down and say maybe they only make 50% of the profit based on every sale. And you'd be able to say, well, we understand your unit economics, we understand where you're coming from as a founder, and the marketer can then be a little more valuable. And beyond that, maybe you go deeper into a second channel. So like that Google Ads and SEO perspective, or maybe it is a designer that then uses AI agents to also become a developer. And it helps you then expand your skill set and say, we aren't just this single piece that may or may not be needed. We can start to become a more considered force for good in a business. So you become more of a partner, more of an integral person that can take more of the logistical intensity off of the founder, off of the other team members, and say we can handle more than just this one tiny aspect. Beyond that, you might want to understand, let's say, brand and creative strategy, and then how to actually measure the results that you're getting. Then maybe you add customer research and psychology so you can say, okay, we're not just somebody who makes pretty emails. We actually understand the psychology and we've done this market research to say, yeah, we really know what we're talking about. Then maybe you want to get into a stage where you can actually start to write briefs for yourself and you can say, hey, we've done the market research. We are just an email agency or something, but we're also becoming more of a growth partner. We're invested in the retention of the customers and things like this. And so maybe they bring on a sales team or something like that. And you can bring your expertise to that sales team and you can say, hey, we're queuing up these great leads and we're building these sequences, and maybe you need to build a brief for the sales folks so that they can create sales assets that relate to the different things you're saying in the email. So it all ties together, and taking logistical intensity off of the founder, you're then helping interdepartmentally. From there, you might want to say, for example, you work in-house and you want to help manage the individual agencies or manage the freelancers or manage the in-house staff. This is the phase where you probably are more managerial anyway. So you're stopping being just the technical person that presses the buttons themselves. You want to be somebody that dictates the direction where things are going. So as you accumulate these aspects, you can just get stronger and stronger at being a leader rather than just being the singular expert who presses the buttons. You say, okay, now we are making an expectation of what's going to happen in the future. Now we know what good looks like, so we can say yes, no, yes, no. Maybe you can be a leader who can stand by the founder of a business and say, okay, don't sweat. We can handle whatever may come your way. We can take the logistical intensity off your shoulders once again. And again, you're continuing to leverage other people, other technology, other people's expertise. And rather than being the hero, you are helping other people be the hero and making sure it's all coming together. Piece by piece, you can become that leader. And that's how you go from a singular channel expert to becoming somebody who's absolutely irreplaceable and is in charge of a whole business and can say, we have it all in hand. It's not just about this one thing, it's about everything working together and synergizing together. So say you're a founder and you're getting on a call with an agency, or you're hiring a new specialist in-house, or whatever it might be, and you want to be able to understand, okay, is this going to be someone who is going to grow with the business and, take on responsibility and take things off my shoulders and look at the business from a holistic perspective and be personalized in their service to my circumstances? Or is this a very productized agency? Is this somebody who knows, okay, we do this, we do it in one way. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, then we don't do anything else. Here's some red flags when you're having those initial conversations. So if they say, we are experts in this, that's all we do, then probably that's what they sell. They're practiced in it. It's not to take away from that fact. They might be great, but they may not be a leader, a person that's going to take responsibility for everything in the business. If they show case studies that show soft metrics like the click-through rate or the traffic and just the aspects that they contribute, then it might not be as meaningful as somebody who says, we did this and it generated this many closed deals won, or this much contribution margin, this much profit. That's a more holistic perspective where somebody can say, we had a meaningful impact on the business. Say, for example, you're talking to an ads agency and they really care about the percentage of spend. If they say, yeah, we charge a percentage of spend, we get paid when you grow, and yeah, we promise that we'll only spend when your results are great, but ultimately the incentives may be misaligned. They might be incentivized to say, okay, well, it's sort of on the line, it's kind of profitable, but if we just keep spending more, then it'll probably be great. If they're going to be biased to just spend more and that's their incentive, that might not align with your incentive, which might be profit or something different. So looking to try and align those incentives is useful. Maybe you want to think about what other aspects they offer. So can you grow your service with that person, with that agency, to encompass more aspects? Are they going to be interested to adapt to the needs of the business as the business grows? Is it going to be something that is going to be beneficial holistically, or do they just do the channel? So say, for example, if they say, yeah, we do the market research, we look at the competitors, we look at the space in general, or at least they have some expertise in the space, then, okay, they're probably just going to kind of apply their best practices and just have a punt, which hopefully will work, but might not be the same as if you have somebody that's super invested or super knowledgeable about your space and can speak like the customer wants to hear. So that could be a little different. Also, if they aren't doing forecasting, that's a pretty expert thing to take accountability for the future of a business and say, all right, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to plan. We know we can line this up with other parts of the business, like the logistics. Again, you might have somebody who's really invested in just selling a lot of product. But if you sell a lot of product and then you run out and it's not aligning with the rest of the business, it might just be going rogue and it's not so helpful if you're ending up in a corner and then you don't have a lot of stock to sell and you're going to have to pause everything or fly in stock expensively, and that just eats into your profit. So having somebody that's going to look across the whole of the business, even beyond marketing, is really important. And likewise, if you have somebody who's just making a lot of promises, so some great salesman who's extroverted and making all these promises and saying, yeah, we always get great results. Guarantee, we always get great results. It's always worked. Maybe they have a guarantee and they say, we've never had to give a refund. That might be because they have some weird sticky factors in that refund guarantee, or it could be just because they are not super invested in the business that you have and the way it's going to win. They just care about selling more deals and selling more services and getting more of a win for themselves. So those are some red flags that you might want to look out for if you're talking to agencies and they might be a bit self-serving or a bit limited. If you are looking for somebody to lend a hand with the leadership of the marketing department. Now, if you are looking for somebody to help take that responsibility off your shoulders, there could be a lot of curiosity about aspects that don't relate directly to their channel. They might ask, what's your payback target? How much do you want to go in terms of spending on a singular customer before it actually gets the conversions that you're looking for? Having these questions about the actual profitability of the business and not just relying on you to say, oh, we want a 2x or we want a 3x or we want a 4x. These numbers could be pulled out of the air, but having a bit more of a sophisticated interest in the contribution margin, the payback period, the lifetime value, the cost to acquire a customer, this kind of stuff is important. Also, you could have folks looking at the stages of your customers, people that are interested. If there is a long payback period, are there different creatives that we should be considering, different channels that we should be considering along the way to get people sold on your product and on your service? So if it's a B2B business, you might really, really take this stuff seriously because you need to build up a lot of trust and a lot of awareness, and there's a long sales cycle and all this stuff. And if you have a SEO person or something like that, and you say, oh yeah, we do SEO and we just get you loads of clicks. Well, if they aren't relevant clicks, qualified clicks, they're not going to make stuff that's related to the sale, then it's not going to have as meaningful a difference. You might have an agency or a freelancer or an in-house team member that cares about biopsychology, that cares about positioning in the market, that cares about how these things are shifting over time. You might have big new entrants that are going for a land grab. And so you will need to consider, okay, if we are running Google ads, there might be a lot of competition in these clicks. You might be spending $100 a click on some of these high competition keywords. So having somebody that takes a consideration of the broader climate that you're in and understand what they need to say to make a meaningful difference to your customers, that's something that is definitely a green flag. Somebody that's gone deep on the data as well, has gone into attribution and geolift tests and marketing mix modeling. I mean, that can be really expertise stuff, but somebody who cares about both the art of what they do and the science of what they do is going to be really, really helpful, because marketing very much is an art and a science. It's about touching people at the heart of what they care about, and it's about looking at the holistic maths that make sure that you're actually getting the result. Likewise, if you have somebody who says, okay, here's what I do, here's what I don't do, and here's where you should hire somebody different than me, that's probably a green flag too, because they're going to have your best interests at heart. So if you have ultimately a growth partner, a CMO, a head of marketing who can own the outcome, manage the stack, tell you when to pause things when things aren't working, even if it's to their own detriment and they're not incentivized to say it, but it's for your benefit, that's somebody who's great. So I hope this has been a really, really helpful presentation. I know there's a lot in here, and this is senior stuff, but it's what founders care about, and it is what makes the difference. So I hope this has been useful. I'm going to put some of the other videos up on screen right now, something that's going to be really, really useful for you. And I hope to catch you on the next one. Thanks so much.